Hi, this is Alex Levin. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Regal, and I'm here with Gregg Johnson, the CEO of Invoca. Greg, thank you for being here.
Thanks, Alex. Appreciate it, and I look forward to the conversation.
Yeah, so to get started, I always love to know sort of how people got to where they are. So, if you think about, what made Greg, what was the very first job that you had? Like even maybe before graduating from college, like where did you start?
It's so funny, Alex, because when I talk to especially younger employees today, they think of their career path as this perfect blueprint that they can manage down to the exact millimeter. And the analogy I use for my own career blueprint is more like when you're out and you're playing pinball and you hit a ball and it kind of bounces around in some spots, and then you get a chance to hit it every once in a while. And so you hit it the best direction you can, and then it bounces some more. So yeah, I've got a pretty interesting background. I studied international relations in college. I thought I was going to go work for the State Department. I did an internship at the embassy in Greece and loved it, had an awesome time, but very quickly realized I did not want to go work for the government. And so as I was coming out of undergrad, wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. Went into consulting, honestly, for lack of making any other good, clear choice. Did that for 2 years. And then I was in San Francisco in the late 90s, had an opportunity to go start a software company with some of my colleagues. Did that. We were a 4-person team starting a company from scratch. I'd never taken any engineering classes. I taught myself Visual Basic and basically programmed a prototype of a product in Excel. We were doing like financial advice online. If you think about like robo-advisory today, we were doing that back in the late 90s. And loved the idea of like building something where you clicked a button and things happened. Like that idea of making something tangible was really awesome. And so ended up working in software ever since. And so I've worked at tiny little software companies, did that gig for a couple of years. We sold that company to a bank. I worked for a French software fintech startup before anybody knew what the word fintech meant. That was like 4 or 5 people. Worked in consulting, working with big publicly traded software companies. And then I would say my formative experience, I worked for a decade at Salesforce and product roles, and then came to Invoca in 2016, had the opportunity to be the CEO for the first time. The company was about 15 million in revenue then, or 100 million in revenue today. And I just love software businesses. I love the intellectual flexibility that comes along with software, and both the product side and the go-to-market side. But never in a million years, if you'd asked me when I was graduating from Stanford, if I was going to end up in the role that I'm in today, never would I have guessed that was going to be the outcome.
Yeah, so we'll come back to Invoca, and it's really an incredible story at Invoca. But if I go back, when you were graduating from Stanford, were people thinking about software and startups? The way I like to think about it is like, what was the majority of your class doing when?
Yeah, I remember actually in probably my third week at Invoca, we were hosting a customer summit and we had a guest speaker from Google. And this individual was at Stanford getting a master's degree when I was getting my undergrad. And I remember introducing him and I said, while he was studying CS and engineering and designing the future of the internet, I was outside on a picnic table reading books about European history in the sunshine. And so, yeah, I think the reality is I was at Stanford in the mid-90s. There was this whole wave of entrepreneurship and focus around computer science and engineering that was happening around me that I was largely unaware of, which is kind of amazing when I look at where I've made my career. And I was super passionate about politics and economics. I thought I might teach. And I think that aspect of my personality is still very much a part of my leadership mentality today and how I try to work with my colleagues. But yeah, there's all this innovation happening around me that I was vaguely aware of, but I was not really excited and into. And I guess I was probably a late bloomer in that I didn't really get interested in software until a couple of years after leaving Stanford. But then once I got into it and I got hooked, I've been hooked ever since.
Yeah. Yeah. So I went to liberal arts undergrad also, and I'm a very strong proponent of like going to school for, whatever interests you. It doesn't have to be like what you want to do professionally. I think it's a fantastic way just to dig in and learn how to learn, so to speak. But it is odd when all of a sudden you graduate and you go, wait a second, like I haven't learned anything that I'm going to use in this next.
Well, honestly, Alex, I committed that sin twice because I went back to graduate school to study international relations for another year and a half, knowing I wasn't going to go into international relations. But it was, for me, like I love learning and I'm a very intellectually curious person. And that stint of a year and a half involved living in Italy for a year, which, let's be honest, on a personal note, is not a bad thing to do in your mid-20s. And so it's always for me about sort of finding ways to scratch the itch of different types of intellectual interest. And that remains an interest for me. I still love to talk about, politics and economics to my friends who teach or work at the State Department or the UN or various other things. I just realized I couldn't do that day in, day out for the rest of my life.
Yeah. It's interesting. I look often when we're interviewing people and when we find people who have that intellectual curiosity, they tend to do very well. So for sure, intellectual curiosity is a very important piece of it. It's, to your point, I think one path for people like that is academia. But I remember looking at it, even when I was graduating from school, going, if I go a path of an academic, I'm going to be alone in a library, studying this thing for years. And I'm not going to talk to other human beings. Is that really what I want to be doing? And I think part of what was attractive to being in a more sort of business role in a company was actually that there were other people. That was very attractive. And the other thing that was attractive to me actually is I studied philosophy in school. In philosophy, I knew that I would have to study for 10 years before I could be anywhere close to the edge of what was a novel in philosophy. Because there's been so much written about this for hundreds and thousands, literally thousands of years. And then I went into look at tech startups, and they were flying by the seat of their pants, and they were at the edge of what was possible today. So I knew that if I went into these technology companies, yes, I'd have to go and learn, but I'd have to go and learn 10 years of history, not 1,000 years of history, for me to be right at the bleeding edge of what was possible. And I think that was at least right out of school, that was very attractive.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I'll tell you, one of the other things that I like about the tech community too is not only is the pace and the speed to net new learning relatively quick. The thing that I really like about tech in general is I also feel like the openness to collaboration and sharing information and knowledge is just a lot more of that than I found in the other industries that I've been in. I obviously was very fortunate to spend a long time at Salesforce, but the alumni community that we have from the Salesforce world, I can raise my hand and ask a question about anything, and I immediately have 5 people that are going, hey, I'm happy to get on a Zoom and share that with you. And I feel like within technology, because that speed and that innovation is so fast, the openness to collaboration is much more significant than what you see in other industries. And I really enjoy that part of it too, because you find ways to learn from others. You find way to feel like you're sort of paying it back from a karma point of view and helping other people understand things that they might not have figured out yet. And that for me has also been one of the really interesting things about the tech ecosystem, is it's sort of that openness to collaboration and sharing ideas as well.
Yeah, agreed. So let's go sort of fast forward to Invoca. So, maybe start with what was the founding story, and then how did you get involved and end up now sort of leading this company?
Yeah, I think a really interesting DNA at Invoca. It's people who understand the world of digital marketing, but also the people who understand the world of the contact center. And those two worlds don't tend to overlap that much. What's really interesting is there's a whole class of companies, big consumer brands, that invest tons of money in digital marketing, but make a lot of money in the contact center. And, obviously, Alex, you'll understand as a CEO, anybody who thinks about go-to-market, a way you can reduce it down to a big solver equation in Excel, which is, where am I putting money in? Where am I getting money out? How do I optimize that flow? And so in the early days of Invoca, we had a lot of folks who understood the world of marketing. It was going digital, who understood that companies were going to be investing more. And one of the key value propositions of digital marketing was the ability to measure and the ability to have a really good understanding of what's working and what's not. But the problem is that these companies had products that were complex or sophisticated enough that they involved a consumer wanting buying advice, wanting confidence they were buying the right product. And so there's this dramatic disconnect between I'm investing money here, I'm making money here, there's no feedback loop in between. And so we were relatively unique in pursuing that opportunity. And when I was leaving Salesforce, I was looking for a company that was sort of big enough to have found product market fit, but looking how to scale and grow. A lot of the product work I'd done at Salesforce was around unstructured data and sort of understanding the meaning of human to human conversation. And at the time I joined Invoca in 2016, people had just started to figure out what an Alexa device was. And the idea that you could use computing and software to really gather intelligent information and automation out of these human-to-human conversations was something that was new, but was something that Invoca had already started to dive into in great depth. And so it was a product area that I was interested in from an ecosystem point of view. We sort of sit in between the digital marketing world, the contact center world, the CRM world. So it was a lot of user personas and technology partners I was familiar with, and it was the right size. Like, we were about 100 employees, and just so happened the company's headquartered in Santa Barbara. My wife went to school in Santa Barbara. If I'd asked for domestic approval to take a job in anywhere else on the West Coast, she would have said no way. But she's like, Santa Barbara? Yeah, I'm happy to go down to Santa Barbara sometime.
Yeah, who's going to say no to Santa Barbara?
Who's going to say no to Santa Barbara? So I was just kind of a match made in heaven. But again, I'll go back to my pinball analogy. Did I ever design that on paper? Did I ever say, I'm going to leave Salesforce to go to this type of company in Santa Barbara that has these attributes? No, like, it was the pinball, and it landed at a right spot where I could take a hit with the paddle and try to bounce the ball in the right direction. And you just got to take those opportunities when they're presented in front of you and make the best calls you can.
Yeah. So, just to help people understand your business, I like to start with, what is a typical problem a customer comes to you with? So you were describing sort of, this world where there's sort of marketing teams that are very analytical and use a set of tools to optimize spend and performance. And then there's contact center teams, to your point, that are critical to driving revenue, but perhaps aren't using the same tools. Even if they are using some tools, they're definitely not linked to the marketing tools. So from your side, you see that, what do customers see? How do they feel the challenges?
Yeah. I mean, generally the customers that we deal with, we'll talk to, a VP of digital marketing who's investing a lot in digital, Google, on Meta/Facebook, on Microsoft, who's tinkering with the website. And they sort of know in their heart, I'm probably driving 60 to 70% of my business impact through a human-to-human selling motion that I can't quite track. And maybe 30% of it is e-commerce, or 30% of those conversions happen online. So I have a sneaking suspicion I'm having more impact than I realize I am. And I have a sneaking suspicion that there's a data feedback loop that I'm missing to tell me what's working and what's really not working as well. But I can't quantify it, and I can't get a data trail around it. And so we'll typically start with that VP of marketing and going, hey, we're going to help you understand what types of conversion, sales, and revenue you're driving in the contact center, not at an aggregate level, but on an individual touch point by touch point level. Like, the consumer searched for this. They clicked on an ad. They came to the website. They had a conversion with someone, either at a retail location, like you think about an automotive dealership, like AutoNation, who's a customer, or you think about someone in a centralized contact center, like a Verizon, who's selling communications products. We're going to help you get that data trail of click by click to a specific conversation. What revenue did you generate? And then you're going to use that data feedback loop the same way that you would if somebody bought a product online. Mm-hmm. Let's take the contact center and make it as trackable and measurable as somebody buying through an e-commerce shopping cart. And let's get that data flow working. And then in time, what we start to work with customers on is hey, how do you actually improve the lower part of the funnel? And if people are going into your e-commerce flows and they're calling in for help, are they doing that because they need a value-added human assistance? Is it because someone's getting a mortgage quote and they've never bought a house before and they're nervous about, I'm about to put in an offer on a house and I don't know what the timeline to close the mortgage is? Or are they calling in because they're not quite sure about something related to their credit score? And if it's related to their credit score, is there a way to improve that online conversion experience to help make sure you're saving that the human capacity for the most value-added interaction? And then we'll do work on the contact center side of, can we give an agent a heads up of what somebody's interested in? We ran a really interesting test at DirecTV about a year ago where we gave an agent visibility into what's the consumer searching for on Google and what were the things they looked at on the landing page before they called in. And an agent, instead of picking up the phone cold, would pick up the phone and be like, hey, this is DirecTV. You're running a special promotion today where if you want our sports bundle and access to all the NFL content you want, you can sign up for 2 years and get 20% off. In the consumer's perspective, they feel like that's magical. That's what I was just looking for. So they feel great. The conversion rate was 2x than what the agents did when they went in cold with no digital body language to give them a heads up. And so like everybody wins. It's a better consumer experience, better conversion. And so it's really about how do you take the combination of digital marketing team, a commerce team, a contact center sales team, and like put that together into a cohesive engine and make it run as efficiently as possible to help you acquire customers and drive revenue.
Yeah, I remember, when we started Regal talking to the CEO of one of the big contact centers and sort of having this conversation with him around why contact centers don't give agents the context. And, I think his point of view was, well, it's a very hard problem. And of course, like, what's the Holy Grail? The Holy Grail is, making sure that you're having the, right conversation with the right customer in the right moment with the right message. Like, of course you want to get there. And the way I sometimes think about it is I sort of use a 2x2 matrix. And I say like, if on one axis is like how personalized the conversation is, and on the other axis is like at what scale the company is operating. If you're a small business and somebody walks in your store and you're all, you know everything about that person. And so it's very small scale, but you're treating them like they're the most special person in the world. Oh, I know what your kids are doing. I know what your pet's doing. I know everything about you so that I can make sure that it feels to you like it's very personalized. If you're a small business and you're not doing that, you're probably going out of business. On the other hand, what happens is as people get to scale, either because of a lack of technology or because of, difficulty involved, what tends to happen is you might operate at a much bigger scale than that little Allstate agent, but you're starting to treat everybody the same. To your point, you get on the phone and say, hi about you, but I'm here. And of course, that's not going to be as good as that experience the customer got where the Allstate agent knew everything. And so I think the trick, the hard part is how do you treat millions of customers like 1 in a million? And that, that's the Holy Grail. Like that's where you're trying to get. And I think, there are different like ways of approaching it. So like you're talking about like all the clicks and the marketing data. We work a lot with, brands on what do they know about what customers are doing on their sites? What are customers saying in a conversation? Right? So if I'm saying in a conversation, I'm interested in an SUV, don't show me a sedan when I go to like the next thing, right?
Completely.
Using that holistic view of the customer to programmatically help your agents actually make that customer feel special. Like that's really where some magic happens, right? Because if I can get on the phone with somebody and say, hey, Bob, I see you were talking to Sally last week and you told me you care most about price and you went and did a search again, but looks like you're getting stuck when you're out, we're asking you for, tell me more. Like it's a completely different experience.
Yeah. The other thing that I find that's interesting too in the contact center world is people tend to orient a lot of their process team and technology decisions around customer service and customer care use cases. And it's almost like the revenue part of the contact center team. It's like the cobbler's children in a way, where it's like, oh yeah, like you're over there and you'll just take whatever tech and process, like we're using for the rest of these use cases. When if you take sort of the CEO board look at it, you like, let me think about these two levers I have in the contact center differently. Mm-hmm. There's the revenue team and lever, and there's the care team and lever. And I don't necessarily think about things from a volume of interaction point of view. I think about things from a business impact point of view. And if I were to look at it that way, I might actually make some different decisions. And I think that's, for me, one of the interesting things is I sometimes see now, like the revenue teams in the contact center may report up into a CMO, like a different reporting path. Yeah. And the paths that you go down are slightly different based off of which of those two outcomes you're optimizing for.
Yeah, and the maturity is completely different. So, I taught by many folks in the contact center role. Like, so I used to work with a lot of contact centers, and I was taught, customer service is a cost center. Talk to the customer as little as possible, right? Deflect. Yep. And, it's a very mature space where eking out every fraction of a cent of cost in the tech, every fraction of an interaction by changing a small thing. And I understand why. And what is the number one question that it should be asking is, how's AI going to help me reduce my cost? Because that is in a very mature industry, like when everything else has been done and there's no more juice to squeeze, like, replacing humans is where they're going. And so like, that's one direction. But to your point, the maturity level in these outbound teams or revenue generating teams, even if it's inbound, is completely different. One, because they've been forced to use technology which isn't right for their use case. Two, because they've been starved for resources, they don't have the processes. And three, because honestly, I think a lot of the people in these teams have come from the contact center world and haven't learned some of the advances in the marketing world. So in marketing, there are some concepts you're taught around A/B testing and LTV to CAC payback and how to look at marginal cost of each thing that are very valuable in these sort of revenue generating teams, but aren't used. Instead, to your point, they're given the same metrics as the CS team. And it's not the person's fault. Like, it's not like they're not a smart person. But if you're running a revenue team and your metric is reduce interactions, speed up average handle time, you're going to end up in a bad situation because it's the wrong way of looking at the business. So I think part of what's so exciting to me is finally now people are saying, yes, this is a different team. These outbound contact centers or these revenue driving sections of the team need to have different processes, different metrics, different technology. But what's interesting also is they're not looking for AI. That sure, they might ask about it, but really they're looking for much earlier stage stuff. Like, how do I use the right metrics? How do I use the right call patterns? How do I get into orchestration, A/B testing? And once that's all been used, yes, eventually AI, I'm sure, will come in. But because it's a mature space, there's actually we see enormous opportunity for customers. Like, you were giving some use cases where customers a huge lift in average connection rate or average conversion rate. These are not 1% improvements that you can make. These are 25, 50, 100% improvements because it's so early.
Yeah, completely. And I think, even just to take a phrase you just mentioned, the whole idea of A/B testing, A/B testing is a fundamental concept in the world of marketing and revenue generation that I think is far less widely adopted in the customer care world. So if you come from a customer care perspective, you don't tend to think that way. Whereas if you come from a revenue orientation, you're like, hey, anything that I can do to tweak to drive incremental marginal revenue enhancements, I'm going to go do. And so it's just a different mindset. The other thing that I find too is there's a different technology orientation where there's sort of this assumption coming from the contact center. You're dealing with existing customers. You've got a very rich customer profile. You understand everything about everybody. And in these selling situations, that's just not true. You're basically someone's kind of on the edge of being an unknown visitor to your website to engaging in a human to human way with your brand for the very first time. And so all the constructs of a contact center platform and even sometimes like a CDP or a CRM, they kind of fall down because there's no data there. And, I worked for a CRM company for a decade and I used to do demos on stage in front of lots of people. And we would say things like, hey, if somebody is talking poorly about your brand on Twitter, you shouldn't be sending them email marketing promotions trying to get them to buy something. If you assume you've got a perfect customer record with all those things tied together, and I know your mother's maiden name, your home address, how many kids you have, who's your favorite sports team, you can do all those things. But in a selling motion, that customer record's basically 90% blank, and you're populating it for the first time, and you're thinking about, how do I build a relationship with somebody where I don't really have much data? And that's just a very different mindset from a contact center customer care world where I know everything about you. I know everything you've bought. I have all this longitudinal history. We call it the buyer experience. We don't think about it as the customer experience. We think about the buyer experience, which is this very unique part of the customer journey where you're really getting to know that consumer for the first time, and you need a different way to handle it.
Yeah. So, we today focus, or I should say the opposite way, the customers that are attracted to us today, where they want to start doing A/B testing, they want more iteration, they want newer tools. These are the ones that came out of marketing backgrounds, came out of revenue backgrounds, have seen this work in other spaces, and they go, yes, it should work the same way in contact center software. And, we have yet to really start pushing people who are not already there, right? So to be fair, our first 200 or 300 customers were the ones, let's say, that were more willing to take the step first because they understood it. You guys obviously have gotten much bigger. So how have you been able to, for hearts and minds, get people to see the value of moving to this more, let's say performance marketing way of doing things? What the trick to do that?
Yeah, we're working on that all the time. I would say there are a couple of factors. Number one, there's a little bit of an inner club that's kind of like, if you know, you know. And we see a lot of customers I mean individual people who move around from company to company to company and sort of bring that advocacy with them. And they say, hey, you need to think about your contact center in a different way. You need to think about it. How does it act as a customer acquisition vehicle for you? How does it drive revenue and upsell? I think for us, kind of bridging the marketing world and the contact center world, one of the things we've benefited from is the digital advertising powerhouses, the Googles, the Facebooks, and the Metas. They're trying to educate the market on how the advertising dollars you spend in their digital platforms don't just drive digital conversions. They also drive what they will call as offline conversions. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the technology they've developed, partnerships they've built, they are looking at how do you understand how those online investments drive offline results as well. And then I think just trying to help people, understand the implications of what it means when you talk about an omni-channel experience. And I think the reality is there's a market perception that omni-channel means every digital channel, and people aren't thinking about omni-channel as being a broader set of channels as well. And helping, one of the concepts I talk about a lot with first-time customers that we have is a lot of what you're doing in these situations is you're trying to give a buyer confidence to make a pretty big leap decision in terms of what they buy. The example I use a lot is if you think about, going on a cruise or a safari or a big travel event, like those are the types of things that you do for, like a big anniversary, or I'm showing my age here, like kids going off to college or things like that. Yeah. And I'm like buying something off Amazon. You don't get to go to Kenya on safari and be there 3 days in and be like, I think I'm going to return this. Like, this isn't not for me. So the confidence level you have to have in buying some of these products, the bar is much higher. And as a brand, you need to be thinking about what are all the different ways I can instill confidence, not only convince this consumer that I'm a great partner for them, but how do I help them get over the line? How do I make it easy for them to buy when the bar is pretty high on that purchase decision? It's a combination of those factors coming together and just overall education. I think the other big thing too is people are starting to appreciate that, one of the great benefits of digital was the trackability of it and the measurability of it. And now people are realizing, like, I can measure human to human conversation with a similar level of accuracy as I can a digital click path. And so if I can have that measurement embedded in my approach, then I shouldn't be biased against these offline human to human channels simply because they aren't measurable. They're measurable today. And so you can let the data drive you to the right decision, as opposed to having sort of a religious philosophy that says, well, if I can't measure it, I don't want to leverage it.
Yeah. I find particularly with folks who haven't seen human revenue teams in sort of consumer businesses, there's this mission, this belief that, well, if it's a human talking on the phone, it must be expensive. When I go, well, why? They go, well, you're putting humans on it. Humans are expensive, like digital not expensive. And the fact of the matter is, it's just because two things have happened in our experience. One is the cost of advertising on Google has just gone up and up and up and up, right? It's not coming down. And, for a brand that's reached penetration for, whatever they're selling, trampoline online, and they've reached penetration. Every incremental conversion they want to get is not, the same as the average. So if their average is $100 per conversion, the incremental one might be $800. So, as they start thinking about where to spend the incremental dollar, first of all, digital marketing is very expensive. And second, humans in and of themselves aren't expensive, right? So if you say, hey, you're going to have a $5 labor cost per conversation and you're converting 1 of 10 conversations, well, it's $50 per conversion. So that's actually not that expensive, especially when you look at a $100 average CAC or a $800 marginal CAC. So I think when people actually dig in and they realize that and they go, wait a second, I was digital cheap, human expense wrong. It's just math. And I need to look at what is the cost of each of these channels on their own. It opens their eyes to the potential of what they can do in it. But yeah, there's just this misbelief, this misunderstanding that if you're going to have a human involved in it, it means that it's expensive. It means that it's bad. It doesn't. On the other side, as a brand, to your point, you can use it to your advantage. You can say, hey, I care about you so much, I'm giving you a human. But you as the brand know it's not that expensive, right, to serve that human. You as a brand know that it's going to make them feel special without you putting that much cost into it.
Well, the other thing that I think is really interesting today that sort of sits at the intersection of what you all do at Regal and what we do in Invoca is humans used to be a blunt instrument that you would have to apply sort of blindly in a variety of ways. Now with the ability to orchestrate both digital and human interactions, you can sort of surgically apply human expertise at the spot where it's most valuable. And how do you, this is one of the things we talk a lot about with our customers, is how do you sort of intelligently and selectively apply the digital lever and the human lever? I think a lot about my experience. Another category that feeds into this space is mortgage and lending. And, I think about when I was buying my first condo in San Francisco in 2006, and my wife and I just had our first kids. I didn't need to talk to a human advisor straight out of the gate. Like, I was a BCG management consultant with a Wharton MBA who knew their way around an Excel spreadsheet. And so I could go do all the math and use like online calculators and do research to sort of think about, do I want a 30-year fixed mortgage? Do I want a 10-year ARM, a 7-year ARM? How do I think about these? The point where human engagement was super valuable for me was I never gotten a mortgage before. I didn't know what the process looked like. And I didn't have the historical experience of how do those different products work in up markets versus down markets, different interest rate environments. Talking to a human being was irreplaceable when I was trying to get to an emotional comfort level of making that choice. But if you'd applied a human to talk to me to say, hey, here's how a 30-year fixed works versus a 10-year ARM, I'd have been like, don't talk to me. Like, I can go figure that out on my own. And so I think the other thing with the advancements of technology is being able to sort of do the 1-2 punch between where's digital highly effective and then where does the human expertise, where's that invaluable? Where does that help give that buyer that confidence they're just not going to get from an arm's length digital transaction?
Yeah.
The possibilities today are fundamentally different where they were 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was a blunt instrument you had to apply everywhere. Now you can really be much more surgical and selective.
Yeah, the most advanced brands are thinking about this in such interesting ways where they're, the segment has this in their card or this whatever, only needs the digital experience. But if they then go and log out, well, now I need to like engage them right away. Or, if they come in, at one point on their mobile device and then tomorrow they click on an email, well, that's an opportunity where, so I agree. So we're sort of running up against time. So, just to close, we've talked a lot about sort of what's happened to date and, how these brands are starting to get smarter and smarter about modernizing their revenue operations when it comes to conversation. What do you think will happen over the next 5 or 10 years? Like, what do you think the big changes are in this industry? And, what should your customers or our customers be looking out for?
Yeah, I mean, I think in this world is I think people and organizations are going to follow the lead of technology. Like we talked about a second ago, technology is enabling more nuanced application of digital experience and human-to-human experience. I think things that we see in these big consumer brands is the teams that manage those two things are so far apart in the organization. They don't collaborate at all. Their joint boss is the CEO, which means they talk to each other like 3 times a year. And I think what we see, one of the interesting things that we see happening is we do as a company a lot of bridge building between those teams. And historically, we've been bridging a lot of those connections as an outside party. What I'm starting to see is some movement and rearrangement of the value chain inside companies of bringing these teams more close together and helping them orchestrate these interactions in a way. And so I think technology is enabling the design of more consumer-driven experiences between digital and human interaction. The barrier is actually not the tech. The barrier is the brand's ability to support the tech and those interactions. And I think what's going to be interesting to see in the years to come is does the organizational structure start to line up behind the tech and make more of these things possible and have more accountability of, hey, you Mrs. or Mr. CRO or CMO, like you ultimately own the number. I'm going to give you the tech, the people, and the process resources to go drive the outcome.
Yeah, I like that. You heard it here first. So, Gregg, thank you very much. So, if somebody wants to, learn more about Invoca or reach you, how should they do that?
Always at LinkedIn. Happy to connect with folks. You can find me on don't know if I can say X still. I still tend to say Twitter. On Twitter, a little bit of Invoca. You're going to get a little bit of college football and a little bit of Barbas are kind of my three passions in life. So Gregg_Johnson, or you can G Johnson at Invoca.com. And Alex, just great. It's fun to talk to people who understand this neck of the industry, understand this unique combination of digital and human interaction, and are having great business impact in the customers they're serving and how they leverage those technologies. So appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thank you. So just give it a